Rain slicked the cobblestones of Blackmere Keep's courtyard, turning the air sharp with the scent of wet stone and damp wool. At 20, Jane was no noblewoman, just a scribe's daughter in a plain beige tunic, coarse but clean, the kind worn by servants and townsfolk alike. Yet today, that humble garment marked her as a traitor. It began with a letter. Not hers, but one she'd copied in secret. A dying knight's confession that Lord Everard plotted to poison the king's envoy. She'd passed it to a rebel courier, whispering, "For justice." She never saw the steward's spy in the alley. By dawn, she was dragged before Lord Everard in the great hall. No trial, no witnesses. "Conspiring against your liege," he hissed, his voice cold as winter steel. "You will not hang. That fate is for men who draw swords. Yours is to be corrected, publicly." In medieval England, whipping was common for petty crimes like theft or moral offences, but rarely for high treason, which typically warranted execution. Yet Lord Everard, fearing martyrdom, chose spectacle over slaughter. He would break her spirit, not her neck. The courtyard filled by mid-morning. Soldiers formed a ring. Townsfolk pressed close, some wide-eyed, others muttering prayers. Public punishment was as much about humiliation as pain, and Jane knew every eye would remember her shame. She was led to the whipping post, a scarred wooden beam at the yard center. Her beige tunic was torn down to her waist, exposing her back to the chill and the crowd. She spotted her younger brother, Tom, held back by a neighbor, his face streaked with tears. The executioner stepped forward. His whip was thick leather, knotted for maximum agony, a tool of corporal punishment, meant to inflict temporary pain and discomfort, as a deterrent. He tested it once. The crack echoed like a thunderclap. The first lash tore across her shoulders. Jane screamed, a raw, animal sound that silenced the crowd. Blood welled in thin lines. The second lash came faster. She bit her lip hard, tasting iron, refusing to give them more sound. By the fifth stroke, her vision blurred. Each impact burned like fire, her skin splitting under the knots. She thought of the knight's trembling hand, of the truth that must not die. "Stay silent," she told herself. For them. The crowd shifted. A woman covered her child's eyes. A merchant looked away. Even in an age accustomed to brutality, public whippings carried a weight of moral theater. This was not justice, it was control. At the 10th lash, Jane collapsed, her knees hitting the mud. Lord Everard rose from his chair on the dais. "Enough," he commanded. "Let her live. Let her scars preach loyalty to every soul who dares whisper treason." He sought not to kill, but to terrify. She was dragged to a dungeon cell, her back a lattice of raw wounds. That night, Sister Agnes, the castle's quiet healer, slipped in with herbs and clean linen. "Foolish girl," the nun murmured, applying yarrow and honey to the gashes. But brave. Her hands were gentle, her eyes knowing. Jane said nothing. Words were dangerous. Days passed in fever and pain. From her narrow window, she watched the castle life resume. Soldiers drilling, merchants haggling, children chasing chickens. But whispers traveled faster than arrows. In the kitchens, in the stables, voices spoke of unrest in the north. Of a rebel force gathering under the king's true banner. Her letter had reached its mark. One morning, a new sound pierced the usual clamor, distant drums. Not the random beat of a festival, but the steady, marching rhythm of an army. Jane dragged herself to the window, wincing as her scars pulled. Beyond the high curtain walls, a dust cloud rose on the horizon. And within it, flags. Red and gold, bearing the royal lion. A faint smile touched her cracked lips. They had meant the whip to silence her, to make her an example of obedience. Instead, her blood had watered rebellion. Her pain had become prophecy. She was no longer just Jane the scribe's daughter. She was the silent witness, and her silence had spoken louder than any scream. In the courtyard below, a guard called out, "Rebels sighted at the ridge." Panic rippled through the keep. Lord Everard barked orders, his face pale. Jane closed her eyes, not in fear, but in peace. The whip had scarred her back, but not her spirit. And somewhere out there, men and women marched for the truth she'd carried. The fire had begun. And she, though broken, was its first spark.